Good day, everyone. I am Jessamay V. Kapindet. I am from BSED English 2A, and I am the first reporter of Group 3, and I will discuss to you the behaviorist learning theory, a short background of Ivan Pavlov, as well as his theory in behaviorism, which is classical conditioning. So by the way, the topic of group 3 is the behaviorist perspective of Pavlov, Thorndike, Skinner, Tolman, and Bandora. Let's go to the next slide. So behaviorist learning theory. Behaviorists believe that all behavior is caused by a corresponding external stimulus. Behavior is determined by the environment through either association or environment. So on the other hand, the behaviorists believe that the behavior that we have in ourselves is caused or based by external stimulus, caused or based by association and environment, or to the people that surround us. So that is behaviorist learning theory. So Ivan Pavlov, he was born 1849 and died in 1936. He is a Russian physiologist, and he is the one who discovered the classical conditioning while studying the digestion of dog. So what is classical conditioning? Classical conditioning is learning through association, learning through ideas, thoughts, situations, opinions from others, no? That is classical conditioning. So, Ivan Pavlov and his classical conditioning. So, when does classical conditioning occurs? So, classical conditioning occurs when a naturally occurring stimulus is associated with another environmental stimulus. In this case, the response to the naturally occurring stimulus is carried over to the associated stimulus. So, classical conditioning happens when natural stimulus and environmental stimulus occurs simultaneously, and of course the response on that is carried over to the associated stimulus. So the best for you to understand of what is classical conditioning of Ivan Pavlov, here is an example. This picture is an example of classical conditioning. So while Ivan Pavlov studied the digestion of dog, he predicted that the dog would salivate in response to the food in front of them. But he noticed that the dog would begin salivating whenever the dog heard the footsteps of his assistants who bring them the food. So maybe Ivan Pavlov created this theory in behaviorism because he was being curious on the behavior of the dog. So in picture number 1, before conditioning, the food there is unconditioned stimulus and the response is salivation, and salivation there is unconditioned response since it is an innate response, or since salivation is an innate response. So in picture number 2, before conditioning, Ivan Pavlov used a bell as a neutral stimulus. He used this bell to see if the dog would salivate, but eventually the response there is no salivation. And there, the no salivation there is no conditioned response. So in picture number 3, during conditioning, he used bell plus food, and the response there is salivation, and salivation there is unconditioned response. So since there is a food pa, he used bell. First he rang the bell, then he gave the food to the dog. He repeatedly do this process. So that's why in picture number 4, after conditioning, he only used a bell, which is conditioned stimulus, and the response there is salivation, and salivation there is conditioned response. It is now conditioned response because the dog learned that whenever the bell rang, automatically there is a food. To sum up this picture, no, the dog had learned an association between the bell and the new behavior was learned, which is salivation. And because this response was learned or conditioned, it is now called a conditioned response. So that is the picture all about. That is the theory of Ivan Pavlov in behaviorism. So another example of classical conditioning that pertains to human experience rather, is that you are a parent, and whenever you come home you have a baseball cap with you, and you take your child to the park to have some fun and to play, and you do this process repeatedly. So there you are, your child learned that whenever you come home, and whenever you come home with a baseball cap, they he learned that you will take him to the park. He was being learned on this process because he was being associated with your baseball cap. So thus classical conditioning is about learning through association. So another example is that your parents called you. Diba, if tawagon ta sa ato ang parents, nadyo na sila sugo or na sila ipangutana, and they repeatedly do this process. And since they repeatedly do this process, you learn that whenever your parents called you, they have a purpose to you. So on the second thought, if you are being called by your parents, friends, neighbor, or classmates using by your name, you learn that they have a purpose to you. So since you learned that process, of course you have a response to them. So that is classical conditioning. Classical conditioning defined as a mental manipulation to reprogram natural body functions. It is a way of learning where a stimulus that triggers a biological response is paired with a new stimulus that the results in the same reaction. And there, classical conditioning also is a classical in that it is the first systematic study of basic laws of learning or conditioning. So there you are. Pavlov's work would later on be very influential for other physiologists like V.F. Skinner. So that is the theory of Ivan Pavlov in behaviorism. I hope you learned something. Thank you.